8. The end of the panopticon. It is still to this ideology of lived experience, exhumation of the real in its fundamental banality, in its radical authenticity, that the American TV verite experiment attempted on the Loud family in 1971 refers. 7 months of uninterrupted shooting, 300 hours of non-stop broadcasting, without a script or a screenplay, the odyssey of a family, its dramas, its joys, its unexpected events, non-stop, in short, a raw historical document. And the greatest television performance, comparable, on the scale of our day-to-day life, to the footage of our landing on the moon. It becomes more complicated because this family fell apart during the filming, a crisis erupted, the Louds separated, etc. Whence that insoluble controversy. Was TV itself responsible? What would have happened if TV hadn't been there? More interesting is the illusion of filming the Louds as if TV weren't there. The producer's triumph was to say, they lived as if we were not there. An absurd, paradoxical formula, neither true nor false, utopian. The as if we were not there being equal to as if you were there. It is this utopia, this paradox that fascinated the 20 million viewers, much more than did the perverse pleasure of violating someone's privacy. In the verite experience it is not a question of secrecy or perversion, but of a sort of frisson of the real, or of an aesthetics of the hyper-real, a frisson of vertiginous and phony exactitude, a frisson of simultaneous distancing and magnification, of distortion of scale, of an excessive transparency. The pleasure of an excess of meaning, when the bar of the sign falls below the usual waterline of meaning, the non-signifier is exalted by the camera 30 angle. There one sees what the real never was, but as if you were there, without the distance that gives us respectable space and depth vision, but more real than nature. Pleasure in the microscopic simulation that allows the real to pass into the hyper-real. This is also somewhat the case in porno, which is fascinating more on a metaphysical than on a sexual level. Besides, this family was already hyper-real by the very nature of its selection, a typical ideal American family, California home, 3 garages, 5 children, assured social and professional status, decorative housewife, upper middle class standing. In a way it is the statistical perfection that dooms it to death. Ideal heroine of the American way of life, it is, as in ancient sacrifices, chosen in order to be glorified and to die beneath the flames of the medium, a modern phantom. Because heavenly fire no longer falls on corrupted cities, it is the camera lens that, like a laser, comes to pierce lived reality in order to put it to death. The Louds, simply a family who agreed to deliver themselves into the hands of television, and to die by it, the director will say. Thus it is a question of a sacrificial process, of a sacrificial spectacle offered to 20 million Americans. The liturgical drama of a mass society. TV verite. A term admirable in its ambiguity, does it refer to the truth of this family or to the truth of TV? In fact, it is TV that is the truth of the Louds, it is TV that is true, it is TV that renders true. Truth that is no longer the reflexive truth of the mirror, nor the perspectival truth of the panoptic system and of the gaze, but the manipulative truth of the test that sounds out and interrogates, of the laser that touches and pierces, of computer cards that retain your preferred sequences, of the genetic code that controls your combinations, of cells that inform your sensory universe. It is to this truth that the Loud family was subjected by the medium of TV, and in this sense it amounts to a death sentence, but is it still a question of truth? End of the panoptic system. The eye of TV is no longer the source of an absolute gaze, and the ideal of control is no longer that of transparency. This still presupposes an objective space, that of the Renaissance, and the omnipotence of the despotic gaze. It is still, if not a system of confinement, at least a system of mapping. More subtly, but always externally, playing on the opposition of seeing and being seen, even if the panoptic focal point may be blind. Something else in regard to the Louds. You no longer watch TV, it is TV that watches you, live, or again, you are no longer listening to Don't Panic, it is Don't Panic that is listening to you, a switch from the panoptic mechanism of surveillance, discipline and punish surveiller et punir, to a system of deterrence, in which the distinction between the passive and the active is abolished. There is no longer any imperative of submission to the model, or to the gaze. You are the model. You are the majority. Such is the watershed of a hyper-real sociality, in which the real is confused with the model, as in the statistical operation, or with the medium, as in the Louds operation. Such is the last stage of the social relation, ours, which is no longer one of persuasion, the classical age of propaganda, of ideology, of publicity, etc., but one of deterrence. You are information, you are the social, you are the event, you are involved, you have the word, etc. An about face through which it becomes impossible to locate one instance of the model, of power, of the gaze, of the medium itself, because you are always already on the other side. No more subject, no more focal point, no more center or periphery, pure flexion or circular inflection. No more violence or surveillance, only information, secret virulence, chain reaction, slow implosion, and simulacra of spaces in which the effect of the real again comes into play. We are witnessing the end of perspectival and panoptic space, which remains a moral hypothesis bound up with all the classical analyses on the objective essence of power, and thus to the very abolition of the spectacular. Television, for example in the case of the Louds, is no longer a spectacular medium. We are no longer in the society of the spectacle, of which the situationists spoke, nor in the specific kinds of alienation and repression that it implied. The medium itself is no longer identifiable as such, and the confusion of the medium and the message, McLuhan, *7 is the first great formula of this new era. There is no longer a medium in the literal sense, it is now intangible, diffused, and diffracted in the real, and one can no longer even say that the medium is altered by it. Such a blending, such a viral, endemic, chronic, alarming presence of the medium, without the possibility of isolating the effects, spectralized, like these advertising laser sculptures in the empty space of the event filtered by the medium, dissolution of TV in life, dissolution of life in TV, indiscernible chemical solution. We are all Louds doomed not to invasion, to pressure, to violence and blackmail by the media and the models, but to their induction, to their infiltration, to their illegible violence. But one must watch out for the negative turn that discourse imposes. It is a question neither of disease nor of a viral infection. One must think instead of the media as if they were, in outer orbit, a kind of genetic code that directs the mutation of the real into the hyper-real, just as the other micromolecular code controls the passage from a representative sphere of meaning to the genetic one of the programmed signal. It is the whole traditional world of causality that is in question, the perspectival, determinist mode, the active, critical mode, the analytic mode, the distinction between cause and effect, between active and passive, between subject and object, between the end and the means. It is in the sense that one can say, TV is watching us, TV alienates us, TV manipulates us, TV informs us. In all this, one remains dependent on the analytical conception of the media, on an external active and effective agent, on perspectival information with the horizon of the real and of meaning as the vanishing point. Now, one must conceive of TV along the lines of DNA as an effect in which the opposing poles of determination vanish, according to a nuclear contraction, retraction, of the old polar schema that always maintained a minimal distance between cause and effect, between subject and object, precisely the distance of meaning, the gap, the difference, the smallest possible gap, ppep, *8 irreducible under pain of reabsorption into an aleatory and indeterminate process whose discourse can no longer account for it, because it is itself a determined order. It is this gap that vanishes in the process of genetic coding, in which indeterminacy is not so much a question of molecular randomness as of the abolition, pure and simple, of the relation. In the process of molecular control, which goes from the DNA nucleus to the substance that it informs, there is no longer the traversal of an effect, of an energy, of a determination, of a message. Order, signal, impulse, message, all of these attempt to render the thing intelligible to us, but by analogy, retranscribing in terms of inscription, of a vector, of decoding, a dimension of which we know nothing, it is no longer even a dimension, or perhaps it is the fourth, which is denned, however, in Einsteinian relativity by the absorption of the distinct poles of space and time. In fact, this whole process can only be understood in its negative form. Nothing separates one pole from another anymore, the beginning from the end. There is a kind of contraction of one over the other, a fantastic telescoping, a collapse of the two traditional poles into each other, implosion, an absorption of the radiating mode of causality, of the differential mode of determination, with its positive and negative charge, an implosion of meaning. That is where simulation begins. Everywhere, in no matter what domain, political, biological, psychological, mediatized, in which the distinction between these two poles can no longer be maintained, one enters into simulation, and thus into absolute manipulation, not into passivity, but into the differentiation of the active and the passive. DNA realizes this aleatory reduction at the level of living matter. Television, in the case of the louds, also reaches this indefinite limit in which, vis-a-vis TV, they are neither more nor less active or passive than a living substance is vis-a-vis its molecular code. Here and there, a single nebula whose simple elements are indecipherable, whose truth is indecipherable.